Don't judge me. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and as always I am reading with a vengeance and I hope you are as well. If this isn't your first video that you've watched, thank you so much for coming back. If this is your first video you've watched, a big welcome to you and thank you for stopping by. Today I'm here to talk to you about books that you might like if you like to travel, or if you like adventure, or if you just like reading books and stories that have the backdrop of places that you're curious about, that you would like to visit, perhaps that you have visited, and you like hearing about them because you've been there and you like that sense of nostalgia, or if you just like books that kind of wander around. I have for you today, I believe 6 nonfiction books, I think mostly, if not all of them, memoirs. And then I have 5 fiction novels in which the characters travel about in different countries. If not in different countries, perhaps they travel in a less likely mode of transportation. Fear not, this is not a video where I recommend books by Lonely Planet or how to visit Israel on a budget. I have books that you might actually like to read. That's not to say you wouldn't want to read a Lonely Planet book or how to get anywhere on a budget. I'm just saying, those aren't the books that I have for you today. So I'm going to start with the memoirs. I'm going to start with 2 books that kind of go hand in hand. They're by the same author and they kind of tell a similar adventure, but I can't really recommend one without the other. The first one is Sex Lives of Cannibals. Okay, it's not what it sounds like. This is a memoir by Maarten Troost, and it tells the story of him kind of leading a life where he's not getting any fulfillment, and he decides to leave all his worldly belongings behind him and move to a very remote island in the South Pacific. I want to say it's Tarawa. And he tells his story of how he deals with stifling heat, deadly bacteria, toxic fish, polluted seas, no television, no coffee. What? Incompetent government officials, erratic electricity, and a whole cast of bizarre local characters that he meets while he's there. It is absolutely laugh out loud funny. It's a relatively short book, so you can get through it pretty fast. And then if you like that one, his follow-up to that was Getting Stoned with Savages. And this is after he moves back to America. I don't know how long he stays there, but long enough to meet his wife. He gets married, and then the both of them move back down to the South Pacific to the island of, I believe, Vanuatu. The book talks about the same kind of struggles that he had in the first one, but he's got his wife, and then he ends up having a child down there. You deal with typhoons, giant insect centipedes, and actual cannibals. Again, laugh out loud funny. If you like the first one, you'll enjoy the second one. Highly recommend. And all the while he's talking about the local culture and just living the island life, which I appreciate even more so now. I lived in Guam a couple of years ago for 3 years, and let me tell you, living the island life, it is an adventure to say the least. Okay, this next one, hear me out on this one. It's not a book I'm recommending that you read and then do what the author did. This is more of a cautionary tale, but it is a really good story. Full disclosure, not a happy ending. You're probably very familiar with this story. They made a movie about it as well, and that is Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. This, of course, is the story of Christopher McCandless, who is a young man. I believe he was 22 at the time. In the early 90s, he leaves all his worldly belongings behind, all of his relationships. He basically leaves his entire life, hikes to Alaska, and lives in the woods. He doesn't last very long. Bad things happen. 4 months later, no, it's not a spoiler. You pretty much know from the back of the book what happens to him. He doesn't make it. And the story is told from interviews of his family, from people that he meets along the way who talk about their but their contact with Christopher as he's on this journey. There's a lot of speculation about whether his death was suicide or an accident, and there's just a lot about nature and really how it can turn on you if you don't know what you're doing, and I found it fascinating. Okay, let's bring our spirits up a little bit. So this next one is also very well known. I believe it got a lot of flack, and I'll tell you why. This one is Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. Very well-known book. I love this book. I read it when it first came out. I feel like most people who love this book have experienced kind of the same experiences that she had that inspired her to write this book. I say it got a lot of flack because I read a lot of reviews about it, and there's a lot of people who absolutely despise this book because they felt like Elizabeth Gilbert came off as pretentious, selfish, privileged, and that left a bad taste in people's mouth. And I totally get that. But taking the book for what it is, this is a woman who seemingly had everything that anybody could want. She had a successful career, she had a husband, she had a house, she had the American dream, if you will, and she was unfulfilled. She ended up getting a divorce, going through a severe depression, and decided that she was going to go on a year-long trek, visit 3 different countries, and kind of find herself. At the time I read this, it was right after I got my divorce, and so I tended to relate, and I'm pretty sure this book inspired me to take my trip to Italy. Her aim was to visit 3 countries where she could examine one aspect of her own nature set against the backdrop of a culture who does that particular aspect well. So she went to Italy and really kind of honed in on just absorbing the pleasures of life, art, food, that kind of thing. She went to India to discover what it means to have devotion. And then she went to Indonesia, specifically Bali, to experience the balance between worldly enjoyment and divine transcendence. Of course, she meets different people along the way. It talks about those relationships that she has. I just found it fascinating. And if you just take the book for what it is and not read too deeply into the problems with it, I think you would enjoy it. The next book I have for you is by an author who has done several books on his travels around the world, and this one is In a Sunburned Country by Bill Bryson. This book is about his travels to Australia and how he deals with all of the things that this country has to offer. He talks about the history of the country, the nature of the country, all the deadly critters, weather patterns, the desert, the city, the people, and he does it in such a way where you are learning really incredible, interesting facts about the country, and also in such a laugh out loud, funny way. This guy is so funny, and he just turns a book that could read somewhat academically, and it doesn't. The way he talks about all of the things that could kill you in Australia, between the weather or the animals that are there, you'd think, oh, I never want to go there. But he talks about this beautiful, amazing country in a way that you absolutely want to visit yourself. Next book is a very well-known book, also made into a movie, and this book is Wild by Cheryl Strayed. This is another memoir where a young woman, after losing her mother and her marriage, she decides to ditch everything and hike the Pacific Crest Trail by herself, starting in the Mojave Desert, going through California, through Oregon, up into Washington State. Doing all of this with absolutely no hiking experience. And it is at times heartbreaking, the loneliness she feels, the loss that she's still feeling, but at the same time, the wit in which she tells her story is just hopeful. This is a story of her healing and learning about herself, and in doing so, the reader also gets to experience the nature of this trail, and it is captivating. So those are the memoirs that I recommend. Now I'm going to recommend 5 fictional novels that have travel and adventure in the background. The first book I'd like to recommend is called A Fraction of the Whole by Stephen Toltz. This follows Jasper. He's an Australian man, and after the death of his father, Maarten, he reflects back on his life with him. Maarten suffered from paranoia, and he was always getting into mishaps and adventures trying to make a name for himself. And in doing so, it led him, Maarten, and Jasper from Australia all over the world to like bohemian cafes of Paris and France, to the jungles and strip clubs of Thailand. At its core, it's a story of the relationship between a father and son, but you do have that sense of adventure as they are traveling all over the world. And I read this book quite a few years ago. I'm pretty sure I gave it 5 stars. It's a chunk of a book, but I absolutely highly recommend it. The next book I have to recommend, I actually have talked about before. It was in my top 21 books of 2021, and that is Mosquito Land by David Arnold. This follows 16-year-old Mem, and she is living in Mississippi with her father and new stepmom. But when she finds out that her mom back in Ohio has become ill, she runs away from home because she's unhappy anyways. She hops on a Greyhound bus to go back to see to her mother. And the majority of the book is her on this bus, the trouble that she gets into, the people that she meets. And it's also kind of told in dual perspective, but it's Mem kind of talking to the reader, telling her story, and also her entries into her journal. And so it kind of reads as dual perspective, because if you are someone who keeps a journal, you know that the face that you show your journal is kind of different than the face that you show the outside world. You learn about Mem in 2 different ways. So this is more of a road trip type of feel to this story, but it is an absolute gem of a book. Even if you're not looking for a book that has that road trip feel or travel and adventure in the background, this is a wonderful story about family and love and loyalty and what we do to protect that. The next book I'll talk about, I've also talked about before, I believe in one of my wrap-ups. It's been one of my favorite reads of this year so far, and that is Wolf by Ryan Graudin. This is kind of a mishmash as far as genre goes. It's a historical fiction, dystopia, sci-fi, fantasy, adventure. This is the story of Yael, and this takes place in 1956 in a dystopian land where Hitler is ruling the world because he has won World War II. Yael, who is a young Jewish woman, she escaped the concentration camps because in the concentration camps, they had done experiments on her, and these experiments have led her to be able to skin shift, meaning she can either look at a picture or look at someone else and become that person. She is part of the resistance, trying to take down Hitler's regime. Meanwhile, to celebrate winning World War II, Hitler puts together an annual international motorcycle race that spans multiple countries. Anybody from around the world can participate, and the winner of that motorcycle race is invited to a victory ball, and they get to meet Hitler. So the year before, a young woman, Adele Wolf, had won the race, and so the resistance that Yael is a part of concocts this plan where they will kidnap Adele. Yael will skin shift to look like Adele and participate in this year's race, win the race, go to the victory ball, and kill Hitler. The bulk of this story is this motorcycle race going across many different countries, high adventure, high drama, there's suspense, there's a little bit of romance. It is just a joy to read. It was so much fun. It took me by surprise. I absolutely love this book. There is a second book to it. I think it's only going to be a duology. The second book is called Blood by Blood, and as soon as I get my hands on that, I'll be reading that. But she writes it so well. You're going through deserts, you're going through towns. It's just enthralling to read. The next book I want to talk about is another book that is a cautionary tale. It is also a horror book. And again, I'm not telling you to run out and do what the characters do, but there is this sense of adventure-ish in this book. And that is The Ruins by Scott Smith. They made a movie about this one too, and they did an okay job with it, but this book is one of the scariest books I've ever read. If you enjoy horror, definitely pick this one up if you haven't already. If you love horror and you love travel, somewhat adventurous book. just doesn't end well for the adventurers. This book takes place in Mexico, and a group of young friends have gone down to Mexico to enjoy a vacation, and they're having a great time, and then one of their friends goes missing, and they go into the jungle to look for one of their friends. They come across this ruins. Shit goes downhill from there, and it is a page turner. I could not put this book down, but I was terrified. Yeah. If you're going to a foreign country, don't go messing around with their ruins, okay? But if you want to read about the terrifying things that could happen to you, if you do, then read the ruins. The next book I am recommending is a very well-known book, and that is Crazy Rich Asians by Kwan. This is about 3 super rich, pedigreed Chinese families and the backbiting and gossip and scheming that happens when an heir to one of the multi-rich families brings home his American-born Chinese girlfriend to meet everybody, and she's not so well received. So that is the gist of the story, but you have the beautiful backdrop of Singapore and Hong Kong, and it is very well written where you feel like you are there. That is one area of the world, well, among many, that I have yet to visit, and it just fascinates me, and I hope to one day get to Singapore. I hear it's beautiful. My husband he's in the military, so he was there, but not for a very long time. So if you're interested in that part of the world, I highly recommend this book, but the story itself is super fun, very entertaining, and very funny. And the last book I have to recommend to you is This Tenderland by William Kent Krueger. This has a little bit of a different feel of adventure and with a little bit of a deeper tone to it. This takes place in 1932, and you're following Odie and his brother Albert. They are orphans, and they are living at the Lincoln Indian Training School, a very unpleasant place where they would separate Native American children from their families and bring them to this school to educate them. Something happens, and Odie and Albert run away or are sent away from the school, but they leave with their best friend Mose, who is a young man of Sioux descent, and he is mute. I can't remember if he's deaf, but he doesn't talk. And another young girl from the school, Emmy. 4 of them steal a canoe, and they head down the Mississippi River looking for a better way of life. They're looking for a home. There absolutely is a sense of adventure in this story, as you have these young children who are on their own. They're in a canoe. They're going down the Mississippi River in 1932. It talks about the places they go, the people they meet, the experiences they have, and it is just a captivating story. It's heartbreaking at times, but also filled with hope and love. Found family. It's just a beautiful story, and I highly recommend it. But those are the books I have to recommend to you if you like to read stories that have adventure, that have travel, just movement in general, or just talk about different countries that you might be curious about, or that you have a desire to visit, or you have visited before. And I hope you have found something here that interests you that you might want to pick up and read. Do you have any recommendations for me if you have read a book with a different country in the background, or just people on the move? I would love to hear about it, so please feel free to comment down below. If you've made it this far, I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate you being here, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.